All right, everyone, we're going to get recording, and I'll be admitting people and answering questions as we go through the chat as well, and just keeping track of everything as the host here. But without further ado, let's begin. My name is Tabiso Rowan. I am a community engagement specialist with Disability Hub MN. And I am so happy to be here today. This is an awesome webinar we have on adaptive gaming and just assistive technology in general. And we have Drew and Kirk and Sue here. And they are, I'm going to let them take it off, but I'm so glad that we met at the St. Louis County Social Services Conference, the St. Louis County Conference, and they were showing me all their amazing tools and assistive technology, and I was so excited, and we got really excited and chatting and talked about having this webinar, and this was months ago, and here we are doing it today, and such a good time of year. It's the most wonderful time of the year, as they say, and this is in the spirit of just joy and happiness and independence and living, this idea of having a good life, I think, is really tied into what we're going to be talking about today, what these guys are talking about. And I'm going to let them, discuss more about all the technical advancements and things that I'm sure are going to blow my mind. And so without further ado, as you can tell, I'm really excited. So yeah, Sue, it sounds like you're going to kick it off. Oh, and last thing I'm going to say is we do have someone here doing the closed captioning. So if you want, you can go ahead and click the CC on the closed captioning on your computer to get that up. And then we also have Joy as our interpreter here, our ASL interpreter, and she is, I have her spotlighted, but you can pin her as well if need be. So if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. And thank you all for being here. And yeah, let's we can get this party started.
Great. I'm Sue Redepenning, and I'm the owner of LiveLife Therapy Solutions. And I just want to give a brief overview. We do assistive technology for the state of Minnesota. We do waiver billable services, and we have grants. So we have technology for home. We have parenting with a disability, and we have AT for wellness grants. So each of our grants are featured on our website, and I'll put that in the chat. But I just wanted to let you know that our whole goal is to help people with disabilities to live in a home or environment that is most accessible, and that gaming is a great social platform, and it also helps with access to other devices and things that people do every day. So I'm really excited to hear these guys present too. Thanks, and I'll put our stuff in the chat.
Thank you, Sue. So I'm Kirk Wydner. I'm one of the people presenting today. I'm a speech language therapist, and I'm also an assistive technology specialist. And I'm a bit unique in that I used to be a IT specialist for about 12 years before I switched over to becoming a speech therapist. And so I'm also a self-professed gaming nerd. I love gaming. I love spending my hours just hacking away at a problem. And I know so many other people do. So I'm just thrilled that I've been able to find this work and bring the joy of gaming to so many people. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Drew to get us started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Redepenning. I'm a biomedical engineer, ATP, and medical doctor. I've been involved in adaptive video gaming for about 6 years. I started working as the assistive technology specialist for Courage County Rehab Institute in Minnesota, where I started to be involved in gaming, and I saw what a huge impact it had on people, and I really got hooked after that. So what's one of my specialties now is working with individuals who physically can't access gaming equipment and finding adaptions for them to be able to be involved in that activity and be able to socialize with people. I think it's a great activity. I'm excited to share it with everyone today. So I'm going to share my screen here. I have a couple slides I'm going to go over and some videos just to get us started for an overview for what adaptive video gaming is. So I first want to talk about just what adaptive video gaming is. So as I kind of talked about, so for someone with a disability who might not be able to physically access a standard video game controller, there's other options now that are available through a lot of different companies that allow someone who can't access a standard controller access controls through different devices. So using adaptive switches, adaptive joysticks, sip and puff controllers. So they're using different controls to access the controls they need to play a game. So the good thing is that there's a lot of options now out there. So Xbox, PlayStation, and other brands now have come out with accessible controllers that really meet an individual's specific needs. So no matter what an individual's abilities are, they're still able to access the controls through these alternative controllers to play games. So there are a lot of different types of adaptations now that are out there. So as I talked about, one option is adaptive controllers. So there's controllers where buttons are in different places. Say that a person can access sipping and blowing to them with their mouth if they can't access anything with their hands, or just larger switches or larger joysticks if a person can't access the small joysticks and switches on a controller. There's also a lot of built-in accessibility options within the consoles themselves now. So they have low vision options. They have options for individuals with low hearing. And finally, they also have a lot of built-in accessibility options within games themselves. So these could be settings that make it so you don't have to use as many controls to play a game, or to make the gameplay a little bit easier if you're using an adaptive controller. So there's a lot of different options now, from the controller all the way to the game itself, that we can adapt and look at to really make a setup that's going to allow someone to play the games they want to play. So one thing I really like to do at the beginning is to show a video of people using different adaptive controllers to play. So this is just a compilation of a couple of different gamers playing with different adaptive devices, so people can get an overview of how someone can use an adaptive controller to play specific games. So here you have someone using a sip and puff controller, and he's using it to play Spider-Man on the PlayStation. Then here's a one-handed controller. So now that allows someone to play just with one hand. And this is a controller we'll talk a little bit more about later. And this would be a good option for someone who might not be able to access small controls with their fingers. Then there's the Xbox adaptive controller, which we'll talk about as well. And finally, back to the quad stick, which is a sip and puff controller. So as you can see here, all of these are examples of how someone could use alternative controls to play video games, even if they're not able to access a standard controller. And one thing I really like to highlight is what the overall benefits of being able to play video games are. By far, the best benefit I see that people get is the social benefits. So the great thing about gaming, especially during the pandemic and even after, is it's become a really social activity. You can play with people online, you can play with people locally. And the great thing about gaming is that it's a really even interface for everyone. So whether you're using an adaptive controller or a standard controller, you can play in the same environment on the same interface, and you can play next to each other. So it's really unique in that respect compared to other things. I know I have a lot of people who play across the country with people, and they build friendships online through playing with people, or just being able to play with family members locally in your own home. There's also a lot of functional benefits of gaming, and Kirk will talk a little bit more about this as well. But one of the individuals you saw using the sip and puff controller to play games, he actually used his controller to access the computer, and he actually got his bachelor's degree from the University of Minnesota using his adaptive gaming controller to do his homework and access the computer. So a lot of this gaming equipment can translate to other tasks for daily living as well. So it's not just for gaming. And overall, from increased social interactions, being able to participate with friends and talk with them about gaming, increasing independence and increasing overall fun in life, I find it increases someone's overall quality of life. So that, and then one other thing I really wanted to highlight too, since we're going to talk a lot about these resources, and if you want to learn a little bit more, because we're not going to go in depth on each specific controller, there is a website I've created called Gaming Readapted, and it really highlights a lot of the adaptive controllers in videos and shows examples of the controllers. So if you want to get a little bit more in-depth overview of some of the controllers, you can go to this link after the video. And I'm going to pass it over to Kirk now, who's going to kind of talk through some examples and show some of the different adaptive controllers.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I'm a speech therapist, and a lot of you may be wondering, what the heck is a speech therapist doing with gaming? How did those two worlds come together? So a challenge that I face as a speech therapist for a lot of people who use something called augmentative and alternative communication, which is using a device to communicate instead of your speech. So for people who have lost their ability to speak, such as through advanced MS or ALS or other conditions, or developmental disabilities where they didn't learn language the same way that we did, we use these devices for them to communicate. And I'll show you a couple of those. So a system like this. Most of these are grids on a touch screen, which is great if you can touch them directly, but a lot of people also have motor impairments. And so you have to teach them how to use something called a switch. So if you're familiar with a switch, this will be redundant, but if you're not, it's a little button. And so there are a ton of different kinds of these buttons. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later. But those buttons, when we interact with these systems, allow an individual with motor impairments to be able to communicate using that grid of buttons on those systems. The biggest challenge that I face is trying to get someone to actually use those buttons, because it takes a lot of practice, a lot of hours, and there's often not a lot of motivation. You'd think that communicating is a big motivator, but in most cases, these individuals have a support system who have been fulfilling their needs for them for a very long time. This is where the gaming comes in, because if we can use these switches for gaming, that's a whole lot more motivating than moving around through a grid of buttons that just speak words. So I get lots of motivation, lots of practice for using these switches for gaming that I then translate over to having them use it on a communication system. And I'll show you what that looks like later. The other thing is that these multifunctional controllers, like the quad stick that Drew mentioned, can also be used as a computer mouse. And so I work with a couple people right now who they started using the quad stick for just controlling the game, and I come back later and they're using it for just using their mouse on their computer. And so that's part of these functional benefits that we get out of gaming, is it's helping people communicate. It's helping people learn how to use these very complex systems, logging these dozens of hours of practice that they need with these complex tools in a fun and social way that then translates into really functional gains in their life. Also, with the computer access piece that I mentioned and that Drew brought up, these people can then use a computer to do anything they want, include going back to school, finishing a degree, and getting a job. So a ton of motivation built right in to this gaming, not to mention it's just a lot of fun, and it's a way to connect with friends and family. So Drew talked about the Xbox Adaptive Controller and a couple others. I want to show you those. I have a couple here, and I want to show you how they all connect together and how this stuff kind of works. So I mentioned the switches. So there are these switches. These are like the jelly bean type switches. They're the standard switch. On the end, they've just got what looks like a headphone jack. This is an 1/8" jack. When you buy these by themselves, they can cost up to anywhere from $50 to $100. So very expensive if you're wanting to get a lot of them. Think about how many buttons are on a standard gaming controller. Like this one is a PlayStation 4 controller. If I had to get one of these for every single button on this controller, and they were all costing $100, that's a lot of money. Especially considering these families often, they've got a lot that they're already spending on medical needs. So to account for that, Logitech, the makers of keyboards and mice, they teamed up with Microsoft to make this amazing adaptive gaming kit. So these kits come with several, I think it's 3 of these bigger jelly bean style switches, 4 of these smaller spec style switches, 4 of these micro light switches, and a couple of these triggers. So you get all of those in this kit for $100. In addition, you get this, which is a Velcro platform you can use for setting all the switches together on. You get a bendable Velcro platform, so you can put something on a person's lap or on their knee or on their chest. If you love stickers, there's a bunch of different stickers so you can label what the functions of these are, and then a bunch of Velcro for you so that you can connect them to the Velcro pads. So if you're an organization or an individual who's wanting to get started with adaptive gaming, the Logitech switch set is a great place to start because you get a bunch of these switches that you can then connect to something like the Xbox adaptive controller. So if you're anywhere in adaptive gaming, you've probably seen one of these already. This is an amazing system. It allows you not only to connect with an Xbox and do adaptive gaming, you can also connect to a PC. And there's the online marketplace for video games called Steam. There's a bunch of free games on Steam, including like all the names you hear people talking about when they talk about games, like, you know, League of Legends, Minecraft, all these games like that. There's a bunch of them that are free on there. And so the thing that really makes this magic and where the adaptive piece comes in is the top. So I'm going to zoom in on this. You can see each one of these buttons, the A button, the X button, the B, etc. Every single function on a controller, you're able to connect in one of these little headphone jacks. And now when the person presses that switch, whatever it's plugged into is going to send that function to the gaming system. And so this just uses a standard USB cable. So it plugs in just like a regular controller into the Xbox. The nice thing is that following Microsoft's lead, the rest of the major gaming console makers have followed suit and done something similar. So for the Nintendo Switch, you've got this one called the Hori, H-O-R-I, Flex controller. And it's just the same setup. You've got this grid of switch ports. Unlike the Xbox adaptive controller, this one also has a bunch of options already just built in if all they just need is some bigger buttons. But again, you can connect all the switches together. This one also uses just a standard USB plug. And I'll show you how you can connect that to your Nintendo Switch. So if you bought a Switch new, you will get a Switch dock. And on the side of the Switch dock is 2 USB ports. And so you take the USB port or the USB plug from the Switch controller and you plug it into the controller port. And that way you've got a really simple adaptive gaming setup. Now, if you want to play directly into the Switch itself, this one is using USB-C. You can get just a standard USB-C to USB adapter, and then you can plug this directly into it. And that way you've got something that's like they can sit in their lap. So that covers buttons, but in a game you also need to move. So the last thing I wanted to cover before talking about the speech systems is something like this. So if you've ever seen a person moving a wheelchair around, you've likely seen a style like this field goal post style of joystick. So this is called the Ultra Stick, and it's just one of many different kinds of joysticks that can plug into the Xbox adaptive controller, the Hori Flex controller, and the PlayStation adaptive controller. So I'm going to show you on the Xbox adaptive controller. On the side, there's these USB ports. You just plug in to the side, and now whatever joystick you've plugged in is now performing the functions of one of the joysticks on the controller. So you could have several of these. You could have 2 of these, one for the left stick, one for the right stick. This one also is nice if you plug it into the quad stick. It also has a couple additional assignable switch ports, so that you can assign more advanced functions. So the last thing I'm going to show is, here's another one of these AAC systems that I mentioned, these communication systems. So again, if an individual is able to touch this directly, then it's not a problem. However, if they've got some sort of motor impairment, then we need to use a switch for them to interact with it. One of the main ways that we do that is through what's called row column scanning. And that's with 2 switches. So right now I've got a big switch hooked up, and the big switch, when I press it, moves through the rows. And then when I want to select, I press the small switch. So now I've selected that, and I'm going to use the big switch to move.
Name. Social.
When I get to the one that I want, I press the small switch. And so if I've been using the big switch somewhere else to, say, jump, and the small switch to shoot, then I can be logging hours and hours and hours of that in a simple online game. I don't even have to buy a game. I can just go to, search jump and shoot games online. There's a billion of them that are free. I could be using the Xbox adaptive controller with those 2 switches connected to them. And then I can have an individual just boom, jump and shoot, jump and shoot, jump and shoot. And then when I move them over to this communication system, they are lightning fast at picking it up. So those are just a few of these benefits of using gaming for these functional tasks, such as communication and computer access. I want to turn it over to Drew to talk a little bit more in depth about the quad stick, the PS5 controller, and some other options.
Thanks, Kirk. Yeah, so I'm just going to touch on some of the other controllers that I kind of went over a little bit in the video on. The first one that everyone saw at the beginning of the video was the quad stick adaptive controller. It typically sits on a mount. And this controller is typically for someone who can't access anything at all with their hands. So this would be for someone who really their only access option would be accessing something with their mouth, or someone maybe who has really limited upper extremity movement and isn't really able to access some of those big joysticks and big buttons that Kirk was showing. So this controller allows you to sip and blow into the different holes. So there's 4 holes on the face of the device, and you can sip and blow into them in different combinations for different controls in the game. There's also a lip that the person can hit with their lower, a switch the person can hit with their lower lip. Then they access a joystick by using head, neck, and mouth movements. And doing all of this together, you can set up a game and program the controls into this so that a person can virtually play any game on any console just by sipping and blowing and moving a joystick with head and lip movements. So this allows someone who doesn't have any upper extremity movement at all be able to play games on pretty much any console or any device. You can also plug in joysticks and switches into the back of it. So if somebody does have a little bit of upper extremity movement or can access a switch, you can supplement the sip and puff on the front of the quad stick with joysticks and switches that the person can access with other parts of their body. I've worked with a lot of individuals with higher level spinal cord injuries, and I've set it up for a lot of people to be able to play extremely complex games. And when programmed correctly and with a lot of practice, individuals can get pretty good at gaming using this device. And the other great thing about it is that it can also be used, like I talked about before, as a mouse for the computer. So someone can be able to use the joystick, sip and blow for different controls on the computer as well to do things like school and work. Another controller that recently came out that's a little bit similar to some of the ones that Kirk talked about is the PS5 adaptive controller. This just came out just earlier this December. And this is the new adaptive controller specifically for the PS5 console. It has a joystick that a person can access with a certain part of their body. And then also all of these are large switches, and these can be programmed for any control that's on a standard controller. So a person can access this joystick, and this can also be changed out for other joysticks that come with the controller as well. And a person can access this larger joystick to access the joystick to play a game, then access these larger buttons to play a game as well. And then you can also plug in adaptive switches into the side of it. So some of the adaptive switches that Kirk was showing, you can also plug in here as well. So by using this device with these adaptive switches, adaptive joystick, and adaptive buttons to plug in, you can really set up a customized setup to play PlayStation 5 games. And you can also link two of the PS5 controllers together if you need to play a two joystick game. So you can put two of these side by side and use them together to control your player in a game if you want to use two joysticks and additional buttons. So that's one option for PS5. And then some other controllers that I'm just going to talk about that I'm not going to show are controllers like that a person can access with one hand. So there's a lot of options out there for someone who might be able to only access one side of the controller. And Evil Controllers, Azeron Cyro, there are two companies that make one-handed controllers, and those are all housed on that website that I showed earlier. If you want a little bit more information on those controllers, you can go to that website and look at some of the one-handed controllers that are available. And one thing I really wanted to emphasize now that we talked about a lot of the controllers is even if you have the Xbox adaptive controller and that's the controller that works best for you, or the PS5 controller works best for you, you're not limited to necessarily the specific console that that controller is built for. So there's ways for us to figure out how to get these different adaptive controllers to work with any console. So I can make the Xbox adaptive controller work with the Nintendo Switch. If the person needs the Xbox adaptive controller to play, but they want to play on the Nintendo Switch console. So there's, no matter what adaptive controller you want to use, there's options for us to be able to get it to work on any specific console that you have. And it really, if you're a gamer and you want to get back to gaming, working with a company like us at LiveLife Therapy Solutions, we can really work with you to find the right controller and program the right settings and find that specific setup that meets your individual needs. The next thing I wanted to do is just show a couple of videos of some people using the controllers. Once again, just so everyone can get a better idea of how these controllers can be used to play. So like Kirk talked about, here's the Xbox adaptive controller. Here you see someone using an adaptive joystick with one of their hands, and then there's a lot of adaptive switches plugged in. And here I have a video of me just playing Mario Kart with the Xbox adaptive controller. So the red switch is plugged in and that controls the gas. And then the joystick just controls the steering. So as you can imagine, if someone can't access the small buttons on a controller, they can use that larger joystick to steer, and then that large adaptive switch button to hold down the gas to play. Then there's the PlayStation Access controller. Like I talked about, it has a large joystick and large switch buttons that allows someone to be able to access those larger buttons if they can't access the smaller buttons on a standard controller. Then here, like I talked about, you can use two of them together to play. So this is me playing Fortnite, and I'm using two of them together to control the same user in a game. So by using two of them, I can access all the joysticks and buttons I need in order to play. And here you can see I'm playing just with one hand. I'm using a standard controller and a PS5 access controller linked together, just using one hand to completely play the game. So no matter what your abilities are, there can be a setup that works for you individually. Then finally, like I talked about, there's the quad stick, which is the sip and puff controller. So you can sip and puff, sip and blow into the different holes on the device for the different controls. Then use your head and neck movements to control the joystick. Then you can see this individual here playing Star Wars, and he's using his mouth to move the joystick. Then he's sipping and blowing into the quad stick for the different controls in the game. And this is a pretty complex video game he's playing. And as you can see, he's able to play it completely, not using his hands at all, and just using sip and blow and head and neck movements to activate all the controls he needs to play. yeah, so I hope that really gives everyone a nice overview of a lot of the different adaptive controllers that are available and how they can be used if you're not able to physically access a standard controller, to be able to play these games and be able to play alongside other people who also use standard controllers. And like I talked about before, working with someone like us at LiveLife Therapy Solutions or through another company that does adaptive video gaming, we can really fine tune and find that specific setup that'll work best for you. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Sue, who's going to talk a little bit more about what we do at LiveLife Therapy Solutions.
I think the other thing that's really important is Drew and Kirk do a really good job of assessing and really looking at the whole person and any movement. Because I've had a lot of people tell me that, my child doesn't have any movement at all, just their head. But really, when Kirk or the OTs or Drew look, we do see some finger flick movement. We see some thumb movement. You can use your feet. So I think we forget about a lot of that. So Drew and I just saw a person that I see who has ALS, and she really, in our parenting with a disability program, wants to be able to do things with her 6-year-old and really wants to be able to play with him and to interact with him. And we tried the Nintendo Switch this week with Mario Kart, and it was so amazing. We were able to figure out that her feet were her best method. And Drew and I and the other OT that was there, Emily, we were able to figure out the switch placement on the floor for her. And she was able to practice it before her little guy, who had never played a video game before, came in and played. And she actually beat him, which he couldn't believe. And 2 hours later, she sent to me an email saying, it wasn't until 2 hours after you left that it hit me what happened today. And I just cried. I have never played with my son that way. I never had, but he was a baby when she got ALS. And so the closest she ever came to being able to do something with her abilities that way was when he put her hand on a tablet and traced her finger so he could do a tablet game with her. And she just said it was amazing. And so I would like it if you guys would talk a little bit about your assessment, because I do think that's an important part that I've been a part of as a OT too, but it really, I think, is super important. I don't know if Drew, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, so I mean, the first thing I always assess is I want to get an idea of what the person's experience with gaming is. So some individuals have played gaming up to a specific injury, and then their experience with gaming is fairly recent. I get some people, though, who have played games pretty much their whole life, either because they've been living with their disability their whole life and they haven't been able to get access to adaptive controllers to play, or they just haven't ever played. So that's one thing I assess first, because there's certain games that might not be really good to start with for someone who hasn't played games in a long time, just because they're a lot more complex. So one thing I always assess is what's going to be the best game to start someone off with, especially when using an adaptive controller. The next thing I also want to look at too is what the person's abilities are. So I always want to assess where can the person access these controls. And my goal when I'm working with someone on gaming isn't just to get them to game again, but it's be able to get them to game at the level that they want to game. So I work with a lot of people who game pretty competitively before their injury, and they want to be able to get to that competitive level again. And I can do a lot of programming tricks, and I can make a lot of adjustments to the controller to allow them to be able to game at a pretty high level. It does take a lot of training to get there, but I worked with a lot of individuals over time, and I can kind of see and kind of look at what can give them the little bit of competitive edge to be able to game at the level they want to game again. So those are a couple of big things that I work on with people, and I also work on the training process. So I kind of know which games are good to start with if they want to play, like if they want to work their way up to play first-person shooter games. I know which types of games are good for them to start with and work their way up to the more competitive online play if that's what they want to get to. So from an assessment process, we always look at what the person's goals are, what their abilities are, and then matching the specific controller to their ability, and then going through that training process to get them to reach their specific gaming goals.
Yeah, I'm just building off of that. When I am working with people in a gaming setting, I ask them, who do they want to be gaming with? Do they want to game just by themselves? A lot of people use video games to just kind of blow off steam, to relax. They'll play kind of like puzzle games, you know, just like physics games, or, you know, these side-scrolling games where they just want to play by themselves, you know, they want to go on an adventure, watch a movie. Other people, they want to play with their family and their friends, you know, like they either they have got friends in other areas, or they've got people who come to their house. And so that's really important to know, like, are we all going to be gaming on the same console together? Are there going to be like adapted gamers and non-adapted gamers playing on the same system, you know, like on a big TV somewhere? Or are we playing through the internet? Because there's things that we need to account for if we're playing online. Or they want to be just connecting into like random groups of strangers and, you know, just jumping through fortresses and whatnot. You know, I want to know, who do they want to play with? How do they want to play? And exploring what kinds of games are interesting for them. There is an ever-growing library of games that are out there. And the nice thing about games is that games don't age out. You know, they're the same games that a lot of us were playing back in the, you know, the 90s, the aughts, maybe even before that. You can still play those through these programs called emulators. Or a lot of them that were on Nintendo systems, you can now play on the Nintendo Switch, which is very easy to adapt. So taking a lot of time to sit with the individual and find out what kind of games do they like, you know, that for me is really exciting. And then trying to, within that genre of games, like if they really like a type of game I like playing is a role-playing game, you know, where it's a very long, drawn-out, dramatic story. Within that genre of game, what games specifically match up with their current abilities? So like Drew is saying, of like, okay, if you want to get to this, you know, like World of Warcraft level of game, what should we start out with? You know, let's start out with something that still gives you the feeling that you're looking for, but you're not going to get frustrated by, you know. I have seen that experience where like a gamer wants to just get right into the big games, but there's so much to learn and there's so much competition that they can get really frustrated. So we try to be mindful of that, of starting them out at the right level of game, and yeah, making sure that it's going to get into the realm that they want it to be, whether that's on their own, with family, friends, or with the online community.
And then lastly, I just want to make sure, Drew, that you put your website in the chat, because I think there's a lot of good resources on there. And Drew has worked with some of the colleges he's gone to and programs he's worked in to do research on gaming. And that's on the website too. And that's really cool to see the impact in respiratory function of using the quad stick, impact of socialization. I think all of those research articles are on there too, and it's great to look at all of those in one place.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to echo too is, or I wanted to say too, a lot of these adaptive controllers can be difficult to kind of figure out at first, especially something like the quad stick. And that's where where we come in and can really help. The quad stick and some of these controllers, to figure out what's going to be the best setup, how to program it, and how to do those little tweaks and those little things to really get someone to that next level of gaming. That's where we come in and we have that experience of working and knowing all those little tricks and those little tips we can do, those little adjustments, and doing all of the things that are out there to make those adjustments for that specific person. So we have a lot of experience with programming the quad stick for specific games, knowing how to, knowing what adaptive joysticks and adaptive switches are available for the Xbox adaptive controller. So if one doesn't work for someone, what's another one, by looking at the person's ability, that will be the best option for them. So that's where we come in on having that knowledge base of how to set up these controllers, how to program them, how to set them up on specific consoles, and all of the different options for adapting the controllers to meet the specific user's needs.
Yeah, and again, building off of that, this idea of who are the experts on this? You know, like right now we've, Drew and Sue especially have put a lot of their time, their resources into learning so much about this. I'm learning so much about this as well. I did it in my last job and I'm doing it here. But so right now we're so happy to be a resource for everyone in this community, but also we want to be building this community. You want to be building experts. And so one example, a gentleman that Drew used to work with, he's in the same house as two people that I'm now working with on the quad stick. And so he is an amazing resource in this community now for his two housemates, because he's able to teach them how to do this stuff. And that's what we would love to see, is building this community of adapted gamers so that people are playing, games with each other, but they're also teaching each other. That's one of the things that I've loved about this evolution of gaming into the modern era, where people across the country, across the world can connect with each other and be like, hey, how did you beat that level? And in the same way, they can be like, hey, how do you program your quad stick so you do that cool triple jump thing? So right now we've got that knowledge. We're very excited to share it, but also we do want to create this community of experts that can just grow and grow and grow infinitely. Did we want to Tabisa, take these last couple minutes to open it up for questions?
Yeah, that sounds great. I don't see any questions in the chat. If anybody wants to pop some questions in the chat, that would be great. We're all here at this meeting, so if you want to just jump on, and as long as we're all not jumping on at the same time, but if someone just wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, I'm sure that would be okay. But yeah, we have a couple minutes here just to see if we have any questions. Drew, I see see the website there, Gaming Readapted in the chat here. And then I see, Sue, you also dropped the LiveLifeTherapySolutions.com, you guys' website there in the chat. And then we have one from Mark. Mark. Oh yeah, so yes, Mark is a host on the Disability Channel and through the Disability Channel, and yeah, amazing. They have amazing stuff. So I'm definitely sure he'll be reaching out to you guys. And Mark is funny comedian, awesome guy, and yeah, wheelchair user like myself. We're wheel guys. We float around the earth, on our never touching the ground really. So.
Well, I know we're going to be coordinating some state webinars too. Like we want to do one with the Minnesota Star program. What we do want to do is also bring other resources that are doing gaming to Minnesota together with us, because we don't want to say we're the only show in town. I think that there's a lot of resources and we each would be beneficial to know what each other is doing. So we're working on that. So I would not be surprised if we do something together. And then the last thing I wanted to say is a lot of Kirk and Drew's people they've seen for gaming, I see as an OT in our program. And when I go back out, they're learning to program things themselves and they're teaching themselves more and more and more all the time. So I think what we give is a start. And then that person for themselves too is doing way more with it than we even realize. And one of Drew's people actually got a job as an engineer, which he hadn't done before. And it was all because of gaming. And the reason we came was he needed a door opener. And so we gave him an accessible door opener. And then we realized there's all of these other things he didn't know about. And he thought about them. And an hour later, he called back. And once he started with gaming, it just flooded him with all the ideas. And he got smart home technology, got back to school, got back to work. It was just amazing.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in, but I just want to end this by saying thank you guys so much, Kirk and Drew and Sue. You guys are my heroes, and I love the work that you do. And as a person with a disability, especially a physical disability, accessibility is such a big big ordeal, and one step towards independence is, you know, is life changing. You know, like I have hand controls in my car and I can drive, things like that, you know, are just mind blowing, life changing. So thank you guys for all the work that you do. And I definitely appreciate you guys and see you guys. And I just want to thank everybody here. I want to say thanks to our ASL interpreter, Joy. Fantastic job. And our closed captioner, Melissa. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone here. And I want to wish everyone a really fantastic, happy, joyful holiday season on this shortest day of the year, although it's still 24 hours. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, enjoying this kind of, you know, transition from, you know, going from all the way to darkness and then starting back this path towards the light again, as they say. So happy solstice, happy holidays, happy new year. Thank you everyone for joining. If you have questions, you can check out our Facebook page. We have some information about this. We'll post the recording of this on our Facebook page as well. And this is just the beginning of the, you know, the future is now. So this is just the beginning of this new age of awesomeness that we're stepping into. So thank you guys so much for all the work you do once again. All right. Take care, everybody.